Have you ever looked at your life and wondered, how did I get here? Welcome to the Parable Podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and right now you're going to meet my friend, Kelsey Brooks. I met Kelsey 17 years ago as a high school student, and I remember her smile. It always lit up a room. And now she is an amazing young woman.
It was more just like me realizing I don't know a lot about myself. That was the catalyst for, I'd say, my relationship with Christ really changing, because that's when I was like, I am so sad and broken. So like, Lord, like, can we talk?
Here's my conversation with Kelsey Brooks. All right. Well, Kelsey Brooks, welcome to the Parable Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
Oh, Kelsey, I met you. I tried to do the math today. It was either like 17 or 18 years ago. You were a young girl, and you had gone to the church that me and my friends had attended for a while. I don't know if it was like in college or like after college, but I do remember, I feel like you were in one of my small groups. And we went on a missions trip together when Hurricane Katrina happened. Do you remember that?
Oh my gosh, that like sealed the deal. And like you and our other friend, I thought you guys were the coolest. So it was just like, oh my gosh, you guys are so cool. So yes, those memories are very, very special to me, for sure.
Oh gosh. Well, thank you for thinking I was cool at that age. We just came back from spring break, my family, and we were driving. We stopped in Memphis one night. So I remember on our way down to New Orleans area, we had stopped in Memphis. It was a sketchy motel. I don't know if you remember that. Or maybe we made it cool, because I remember doing facials that night.
Was that the trip we went to Graceland? Did we go to Graceland?
Yes, we did. Nothing says a mission trip like staying in a sketchy hotel and going to Graceland as you're about to serve others.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, so Kelsey, what do you remember about yourself during that time? Obviously, you thought it was pretty cool. So that's check right there. What else do you remember about yourself? Like, what were you feeling about yourself when you were a high school age student?
I feel like high school was like a pretty decent time in my life. Like, I know some people have horror stories, but I was on the drum line. So I was like in the marching band, and that was really fun. And then I was also on the badminton team. So I was in different friend groups. Like, I had different friend groups. My brother is a year older than me, and he was a 3-sport athlete. So everyone knew that I was his sister. And my dad also was driver's ed instructor and basketball coach at the school. So I had eyes on me all the time. But no, high school was good. It was good. And church was such a sweet part of my upbringing. So I spent a lot of time at church, for sure.
Yeah. That church that we were a part of for a while, I loved remembering, like, I saw you recently at a baby shower. And so I brought my daughter, who I remember your mom, I don't know if you were there too, but your mom prayed over Edie in my stomach. And so like to now bring this 13-year-old daughter, like it was such really good times. Like it was such a small church, very connected. We did a lot of things together. I love those days too. Would you say that Jesus was like a part of your life? Like you knew who Jesus was, that he was more than just a name, or did that happen for you later in life?
I definitely think it's always been part of my upbringing. I mean, my mom is a pretty strong believer, and she raised my brother and I in the Christian faith, and I grew up at that church. And my mom was hyper involved in like the harvest parties were super lit, vacation Bible school. I was on the quiz team for a while. So I was always in church multiple times a week. So I always knew who Jesus was. Like the more tangible things of like, oh no, Jesus is actually real. Like I didn't realize those things till later. But I grew up around learning about Jesus, knowing who he was, knowing I wanted him in my heart, for sure.
So tell me, what are you up to these days? What are you passionate about?
Is it sad the first thing that came to mind is food?
No. You know what? And I'm going to tell you why.
Yes.
Where we were on spring break, I don't think of myself as a food snob, but I just love good food. Like I love going to restaurants. I love, people putting effort. So we were on this smaller island, but they really only had a couple of restaurants. And I have to tell you, I was very disappointed. We made a bunch of our own food, but I was like, darn, there was a couple things like, we're by the sea. Like, why? Yeah. Why?
Yeah. Take advantage.
So no, it is not bad to say that you're passionate about food. I think tell me what is your favorite foods?
Well, a little bit of context for that. I work downtown Chicago, so I'm surrounded by all different types of food. Like, pick your poison of what ethnicity of food you want to explore that day, right? But this is going to sound so like low class. I love a good burger.
Yes.
Like, I've really gotten into burgers, and I like am very picky on burgers now. And I really love Mediterranean food, like really good hummus, really good like naan or falafel, just like warms my heart. And I will also say too, like, along with your original question, what am I passionate about? I love people, and food is a perfect place to share yourself with others around a table. Aside from like appreciating good food, it's more like I get to learn about other people and catch up with their lives, and food is just the common place to do that with.
Yeah, that is a good point, obviously, with food, but you're right. Around the table is just one of the best places to be. I love laughing and telling stories, playing games. So yeah, I do see that connection. For your day-to-day, you work with Chicago Semester. Tell us a little bit about how did you get into that role and what drew you to working with Chicago Semester?
This goes along with my story too, which we'll dive into later. I was looking for a job, and I did a study abroad program when I was in college. I got to do semester in Spain through Trinity Christian College. And so I studied abroad in Spain for a semester. I double majored in communications and Spanish. And so like part of the Spanish requirement was living in a foreign country. So I had heard of Trinity Christian through that. And when I read the job description, so I'm the assistant director of recruitment and college relations. And when I read the job description at Chicago Semester, I mean, a lot of it is building relationships, connecting with college students. And Chicago Semester is really like a study abroad, but in Chicago. So I get to go to different college campuses and talk to college students about, have you thought about living in Chicago for a semester or summer? And that's been really, really fun. So the majority of my job is just connecting with students, professors, and faculty and staff at different partnering institutions. And so my role has definitely evolved over the years. I know you and I, Danielle, were talking about how we don't love social media, but my first title was coordinator of recruitment, and I was in charge of our social media accounts too. So I've done a little bit of that work too. But yeah,
it's just cool to see the trajectory of your life, of knowing you as just like junior high, high school girl. And here you are living in the big city, eating hummus all you want. And helping students find their way. I think it's amazing. It's so cool. If we could imagine that we have burgers right now and we're sitting across the table, you know, that's where stories happen. So Kelsey, I'd love for you to share a little bit about one of your parable stories and how that really connects into a little bit that we've been talking about already.
A little bit of backstory too is I had a really beautiful and privileged childhood, and my parents both worked. I had a 2-parent household. They both had full-time jobs. We always had a roof over our head, clothes on our backs, food on the table. And I went to Indiana Wesleyan University and had a wonderful experience. And I have one brother. I should say that too. The year after I graduated college, my parents filed for divorce. So our family was very scattered. My brother moved to Dallas to start a full-time job there. I moved back in with my mom. And so at like 22, I had no idea what I was doing, what I wanted to be. My family, who had been like such a stable environment for me, was broken. And my mom, like this very vibrant, I mean, you know, my mom, like she's just this bundle of like joy and love. And she's very caring. And seeing her struggle and walk through depression was so hard. And as a 22-year-old, I don't know what I'm doing. So it was just a really weird, hard time while still trying to maintain a relationship with my dad. And so I've done a lot of different odd jobs. Like I was a barista at Starbucks. I was a bilingual receptionist at a community center. I lived with my mom for like 4 or 5 years, and I was so ready to move out, like most mid 20-year-olds. But I didn't have the financial means to do so. And so I ended up getting a job at this company being an export logistics coordinator. So I was in charge of like the big shipping containers in the middle of the ocean. I was in charge of getting those from point A to point B and the paperwork for that, but it was all Spanish speaking countries. So like, how do you say like 40,000 pounds of frozen boneless chicken? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to say that. They didn't teach us that in school. So that was like a pretty hard learning curve. And so I moved out from living with my mom because that new export logistics job paid me enough. And then after about 5 months, I was let go. And so that was really tough. None of my friends that I knew of at the time had been fired from their job before. And so I'm just like, okay, so I just moved out from living with my mom. Now I don't have an income. I don't know what I'm doing. And here we are. And like also just like the way that I got the job was so easy compared to previous times that I'd looked for a job. So I just felt like, okay, God, if you open this door like so easily for me, why would you slam it so hard in my face? Yeah. I was just very confused. And so there was a period of about 2.5, 3 months where like I set a routine for myself and I would wake up, go to the gym, and then just look for jobs for about 8 hours. I should say too, I'd have a big chunk of time where I had devotions, and it was mostly just like me yelling at God because I was angry. Like I was like, I don't understand. Most of my friends after college had moved into their own place, gotten married, moved to a different state. Like they've been able to do all these things. And I was like, my family's falling apart. I'm living with my mom who's depressed and I can't find a full-time job. Like what is going on? And so when I finally find something, when you open a door where it's like, this seems really good, then it doesn't turn out. So it was just a lot of back and forth yelling at him. And so then after a couple months of looking, I read the job description for a Chicago semester and I was like, I could do that. Like I could talk about Chicago with college students. And I'd been wanting to go into the higher education sector for a while. And so I applied not thinking a ton about it. And then I ended up getting an interview and they took a chance. So
wow, that's great, Kelsey. I think a couple things that I took away from that. One is, you know, sometimes in life, there's going to be transition. There's always going to be transition, and it's not going to be to our benefit, you know, where we're just like, this is great. Like everything is working out. Two, I love that you yelled at God, because sometimes we feel like, oh, I don't think I can do that. And he can take it. And three, like what you said of you lived this life of 2-parent household and now it's broken, and kind of just reeling with the reality of just figuring out what your reality is. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about what it's like when we live in a world where, as a Christian, here's the 3-step plan. You should be married by the time you finish college, have a job, and you should be in your own home. There's kind of like these rules of like planning children. And it's kind of hurtful because, first of all, Jesus was single. I don't know if anyone knew that. And, you know, like his goal was just to share the word of God and share Jesus. So it's really challenging for someone who is single. They feel like they don't have any worth. So can you speak a little bit into that of like how you felt kind of just all over the place when the world kind of gives you this roadmap of your life and it doesn't look anything like that?
Still, I mean, there's still days when I struggle with that. My life compared to a lot of my friends looks very different. And not that my friends are all just like carbon copies of each other. Of course, they each have their own struggles every day. But especially going to a smaller Christian school, marriage was very common. And I'm not in double digits yet, but I've been in 9 weddings. And, you know, it's just like, and it's been an honor. Like, it's so fun. But it is like hard when you get questions of like, well, why are you single? And because with that, it's making it sound like I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm not. Like marriage, especially after watching a marriage fall apart. I take marriage very seriously. I don't want a buddy. I have friends. I have a lot of beautiful friends. I want to be married if I feel like me and this other person can glorify God better together. And I really feel like God has called us together. And that does not happen every single day. And so it is very hard and it goes in waves. There's times where I'm like, this is fine. I'm good. I'm thriving. I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. But then those like voices get in your head when people ask you questions and you're like, wait, is there something wrong with me? Am I not desirable? Because I don't have the house, white picket fence, and a dog. So it's been a lot of ups and downs. I've like spent a lot of time self-reflecting. And I will say like, that is the beautiful thing about being single is you have time to ask yourself really hard questions without distraction or like wanting to please someone else. And especially in the time, like when I was let go in between jobs, you have people that you reach out to. And I did feel like supported, but at the end of the day, like you have to make a decision to get up and you have to rely. The only other way you can make it through your day is be like, okay, God, I don't have anywhere else to go. This is fully in your power. And there's been a handful of other instances in my life when I'm just like, yeah, I give up. You got it, God. Like, I understand now you're trying to get my attention. It's a struggle, but it's something that I continue to work through. And I find the beauty in it a lot of the time, for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for being honest about that, Kelsey. In the moments when you were yelling at God, just kind of questioning, like, where am I supposed to go from here? Especially when you felt like you got a job, you were getting those tons of chicken across the seas, you know?
Yes.
When you're in that moment, how did God kind of gently let you know that he was still there, even when you were desperate and searching?
I always felt his presence. Like he showed up every morning for my venting session. I always felt him there. I mean, unfortunately, I will say like some of the times that I have felt closest to God are my lowest points. And so I always felt him there. I was talking about this with a friend yesterday. When I picture God, I picture a very gentle, meek person who's very soft-spoken. And so when I'm like yelling and I'm like, oh my God, why would you do this to me? What the heck? I thought this was going okay. I thought this is what you wanted. That's why you opened a door. It's more like I hear him being like, Kelsey, it's okay. It's okay. Just like he's like reassuring me and his soft-spoken voice just like brings me down a bit. So I definitely he showed up when I was there to yell at him. And like you said, he can take it. Absolutely. He can take it.
I think there's a difference for kids who grow up and, their parents get divorced at a young age. But you're right. When you have spent your whole life in a 2-parent household and it was loving and it was great. And then at 22, your parents divorced, there is a lot of like uneasiness. So for somebody that is walking through when their parents get divorced at a later age, for them, what encouragement or reminders would you give them for somebody who's feeling that same way right now?
There's never a good age to get divorced. Like divorce is not normal, right? Like that wasn't what God intended when he created marriage. And so there's never going to be a good age for that to happen. But I will say like there's a lot of layers to divorce, especially because my parents were almost married for 30 years. So there's going to be different grieving steps. And so I think like one of my mistakes was like, oh, they're going to sign a paper and we're going to move on with our lives. And that was over almost 10 years ago. And there's still repair that needs to be had. So I would say give yourself grace because no matter if you're 3, 13, 53, like it's going to be a big change for your family. And everyone in my nuclear family grieved very differently. And that was hard too, because there's no like right way to grieve, but it was hard because I felt felt like I needed to maintain a relationship with my brother and with my mom and with my dad. And I felt loyalties to all of them. And I didn't know how to do that well. So something else that could be helpful is get therapy. Like no one had really talked to me about that. And that's another thing too. Not a lot of my friends their parents have gone through divorce. And so that can be really isolating. And so a way to just help cope is just to talk to someone and process it who's not in the situation. I didn't want to talk to my mom about it because she was heartbroken. And my dad was kind of off in a different, like he was just in a different, my dad's also not a believer. And so his perspective on things is very different. And so I would say, give yourself grace. Find someone to talk to who's not in your family. It could be really helpful tools.
I'm sorry, first of all.
Thank you.
You know, you met her. I have a daughter now that is 13, and like, it's just hard to imagine the pain of seeing like two people you love, like to now like have that barrier between them. And so I'm sorry for you on that. How did you feel? Not that that ever goes away, but how have you seen God work in your relationships with either one of your parents because of this?
It's been really hard. I think they've needed, well, I'll just say like when this happened, this was the phase of my life when I started to be like, oh, I need to make decisions right now for my family. And I know most or all people will go through that at some point. Your parents will need your help and you'll have to step in as a parent. And that's hard. So as a 22-year-old, that was not good for me, but I had to do it. So my mom has needed different things at different times. And so for the time I was living with her, there were many instances where I had to make executive decisions because she wasn't able to. She was just emotionally done. And my mom is she's a strong woman, and she's grown. I've seen her grow, and I've seen her come into her own now as an older woman, single, where I know she never thought she'd see herself, and I know she never wanted to be, but I've seen her grow into that and into her faith in a new way. And that's been really beautiful. And even now, like as my mom is going through her cancer journey, there's things that I find myself doing again, like having to make certain decisions and be the caretaker. But it's so different because we've been here before. And my mom and I are both more dependent, I think, on Christ, and we're not so broken or just like misplaced as we were like 9 years ago. So my mom and I have grown a lot, and we both have done work separately on ourselves and together as well. And I think with my dad, it's been a lot of like, I had to make a decision on how I wanted to relate and connect with him because we don't share a common faith. Like we can't talk about our relationship with Christ and what that looks like. And my dad actually moved to Phoenix a couple years ago when he retired. So I know that he's not perfect, but he's my dad and I love him and he helped raise me. And my dad is sick too. So I'm just like, I made a conscious decision, like, you're going to put in effort. And I try to love him to the best of my abilities because I know that's what Christ would do. I mean, I've had to learn boundaries. Like there's certain things where I'm like, this probably isn't super healthy for me. With both my parents, boundaries was like not talked about ever. And so now that I'm more self-aware, there's been conversations that I've had to have with both of them that have been uncomfortable, but I need to also protect like my mental health. So it's evolved a lot over the years for sure.
That's so true. I think whether somebody is Christian or not, people are human. And so the expectations that we have for the people in our life, most likely, just like we are going to do, we are always never going to measure up either because we're human and we fail. It's hard, because when you love someone so deeply, it's hard to to see the weaknesses and to walk alongside them, but still choose to love them daily. He talked about boundaries. How did that like start forming for you? How did you know, like, hey, was that through therapy? Was that just through like you've realized things over the course of, the last 9 years? How did you know how to set boundaries for yourself?
I think a lot of like me becoming self-aware happened after a really hard breakup I had when I was about 25. And so I did a little bit of therapy, but it was more just like me realizing I don't know a lot about myself. And that was the catalyst for, I'd say, my relationship with Christ really changing, because that's when I was like, I am so sad and broken. My mom isn't someone that I can really talk to right now because she's sad and broken. So like, Lord, can we talk? I'd love to talk to you. And so through like, I'd say reading the Bible and reading some self-help books, a little bit of therapy, and also just like things like taking personality tests, like learning what my Enneagram number was and like what are things that I am prone to do when I'm unhealthy versus healthy. Like learning those things about yourself will help you, not just yourself, but it'll help you in your relationships with other people. So it was a combination of all those things and just hard work and looking at myself and being like, that part of you is not cute. That's not Christ-like, or like I don't think that that's going to line up with how God wants you to be or the woman that God is trying to form you into. And so like, what do you need to do to change that? And God never, like in my conversations with him, he's never rude about it. It's more just like a gentle nudge. And it's like, Kelsey, like, are you sure you want to do that? Or like, I don't see you doing that. It's like things like that are helpful.
I think it was in 7th or 8th grade. It was like some kind of art class where we had this rock and we just had like these weird tools. It wasn't great, Kelsey. Let me tell you that. But you had to like, sometimes you could, if you used a certain tool, you could chip off like a giant piece. And sometimes it was more of just like using this certain sandpaper or another stone to make it into the shape you wanted, which again, it really just looked like another rock when I was finished. But what I was thinking about is just that, when we go through times of transition, sometimes God is going to like chip off a whole rock, right? A whole piece of us. And sometimes it's going to be a little bit more refined where it's just slow and steady. And we are choosing to, because he wants us to learn about ourselves. He knows everything within us and what we are capable of. And it's slow and it's hard. And sometimes it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. What would you say if you could look back over the last 9 years or maybe the whole entirety of your life? What are you most proud of about yourself?
I think the things that are happening in my life right now, specifically with my family and my parents, and working through different illnesses or just different family drama and trying to discern how best I should respond. I'm really proud of the work that I've put in to just like better know myself and know ways that I can help other people, if that makes sense. And also just like, I'm proud of how dependent I am on Christ, which sounds really weird because like as a single woman of color, we're like taught to be like, do it yourself, hustle, work hard by yourself. It's all just like this individualistic culture, but I am just like so dependent on him. And I know that like all the good things in my life are only there because of him. And I have tangible examples like the ones I'm sharing with you right now that I can share with other people and I can point to. And I know there will be many more in my life and probably a lot of them will be uncomfortable, but it's just helpful. And I'm really thankful and proud of like the work and looking back and being like, this is when I trusted God. This is when God did this in my life. This is how I was able to respond. And it's just like this pattern over and over and over. Because I know there's some people who don't have that opportunity, or maybe they're just too broken to be able to look at that perspective, which is very understandable. But I feel like like today, if to give you my answer today, I'm proud of that.
I'm proud of that for you too, Kelsey. I think you're right. There is going to be brokenness throughout the course of our life. It will always be there because we live in a fallen world. But how do we grow and adapt and learn and become dependent on God? And it's a cycle over and over again. I mean, we just get a new set of things that are going to be a part of our life. So I think building upon that year by year, over and over, instead of it letting us just like go deeper and deeper into despair and brokenness, God is restoring us and refining us for whatever is coming our way. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Switching gears, I'd love to know what do you love about your job? Because you had that part of your story where there was transition and uneasiness and wonder of like, what am I doing with my life? So you get to talk to, those students, those college students that are wondering, like, should I take a semester in Chicago? Where do I go from here? How has your story kind of just impacted what you currently do now?
I mean, I will say, after getting fired, the Lord did lead me to a job that has been one of the biggest blessings, I could say, of my life. I've been there for almost 4 years, and I would not have been ready for this job 4.5 years ago. Like, I think I had to be fired first and even go through like that period of time between like 22 and 26 where it was just like, this is awkward. I don't know what I'm doing. My family's falling apart. Like, I feel like I had to do that first in order to be able to connect with college students the way that I can. And so that is such a rewarding part of my job. I get to watch these college students who, most of them come from rural, small Christian schools, and they're trying something new and they're learning how to navigate a city. And we set them up with internships in Chicago. So they're like learning how to be young professionals, and they're paying rent and they're using CTA for the first time. And just to see their confidence build from like week 1 to even like week 4, like they're just a completely different person. And I get to watch that. And that's really, really fun.
That's great. You was Illinois Wesleyan a Christian college?
Indiana Wesleyan was my alma mater.
Indiana Wesleyan.
Yes. Yeah. It was a Christian college. Yes.
Why do you think, I did go to a Christian college as well, and I do have my answer for this, but why would you choose a Christian college over like a major university? Why for you?
I think for me, a sense of belonging and community was like the biggest thing. Like, I can be outgoing and I have to be outgoing in my job a lot, but I'm typically more of a person that kind of sits and observes. And being like going to like U of I with like 50,000 students was not super appealing to me. And so when I visited Indiana Wesleyan, and the class size is pretty small, you form actual relationships with professors. And I actually get to visit my alma mater now for my job, and my professors are now like my friends. And even just like campus life and dorm stuff, I have lifelong friends from my college experience. And so it's not to say you can't do that at bigger universities, but smaller Christian schools are super intentional with that. So you kind of have to avoid it. Like, if you don't want that, you kind of have to avoid it, because otherwise, like, you're going to be swept into it. They're really intentional about community on their campuses.
Yeah, I would go the same for me. It was very intentional. It was very small. And I believe that God, whether or not I chose a Christian college or not, and for everyone else, God will still continue to work in your life. It wasn't because just because I went to this certain college that my life has turned out the way it was. But there was just those moments. I really came into my own and finding my own relationship with Jesus and just learning so much and having that connection with so many other different students. And so I wouldn't change it, for me anyways.
Me neither.
It was a beautiful experience, and I'm grateful, even with college tuition prices.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, my roommate the other day was like, because I paid off one of my loans, and she's like, if you could go back 15 years ago, would you still sign up for having to owe that much money? And I was like, yeah, I would.
Yeah. Now I know that's not the same feeling probably for everybody, but yeah, those are our experiences. And so, Kelsey, going back now, if you could talk to the girl that I went on that youth group trip with 17 years ago, now knowing what you know now of what you're going to experience with, getting fired and having your parents divorce, what would you go back and tell Kelsey at 16, 17 years old?
Well, I think one of like the big things I wanted to hit home today, and like praying about my story and like the message I wanted to get across, the word trust just comes to mind. Life throws you curveballs all the time, and we are broken and we are human. But I think I would just tell myself at 16, 17, like, you are strong and you're going to find your strength through Christ. And there's going to be some seasons of life that are really, really hard, but it's not the end. And he's working on your story. Like he is continually molding and crafting you into the person you want to be. And if you pay attention, like, he wants us to be part of that. He doesn't want us to just like turn a cheek or close our eyes to what he's doing. Like, he wants us to be active with him. And so, yeah, I would just say, like, this is going to be hard, but trust him, and you're going to be okay. So
wise, Kelsey. So proud of you and everything that you've gone through. And you're right. Like, it's painful, but it is worth it. He is worth it. And just continue to trust I'm so proud. So wise, Kelsey. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me and sharing your story with everyone today.
Thank you, my friend, for asking me, first of all, and asking really good, insightful questions.
I hope I lived up to the level of coolness I was when I was sweating my armpits off in New Orleans. Oh my gosh.
Yes. Well, even like, I haven't seen you in so long, and the fact that you said I have a podcast, I was like, she's still cool. Oh my gosh. Like, not everyone has a podcast. That is amazing. So
I'm like right up there with Joe Rogan. I'm just kidding.
It's neck and neck. You're neck and neck.
It's close. I'm coming for you, Joe. All right. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was so great to reminisce with Kelsey and how we connected. You kind of forget the places that God has put you in life. And now looking back, you can see that it did matter. To connect with Kelsey, simply visit daniellezapchenk.com for details. And here are some reflection questions from our time with Kelsey. Number one, it's just about talking with God, saying, hey, can we talk a bit? It doesn't have to be so formal. And for some of you, maybe that is talking out loud. That is just closing your eyes. You're being in your head, driving. Maybe it's journaling. He is the one that is going to repair your heart when it is broken. So if you are feeling that way today, just talk to him. Number two, I'd love for you to journal about a time when you walk through a tough transition like Kelsey did. And you can look back and see how God was at work through it all. One easy way to support the Parable podcast is by following me on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, or on YouTube. We appreciate you sharing the podcast with a friend so they can hear about all of these amazing Parable stories. And thank you to my technical producer of a husband, Eric, for his amazing editing skills on this episode. That is going to do it for today. I'm grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your Parable showcases how he is constant through it all. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.